everybody. I am here, and you'll see me in just a moment. Hello. I'm waiting for Bob Hockett to arrive, and I'm waiting for Lisa to arrive. I don't know why Bob is late. I do know Lisa had a previous meeting, and that she will arrive as soon as she can. So I'm going to start. Let me just do one thing here. If you'll give me a second. I will just do a couple of shares on Facebook. I will leave most of them to our very capable sharing team. So here we go. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. And we got a few more people who have yet to say hello. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about the latest IPCC report. And we're going to look at what to do about it from an MMT lens. Let me begin by sharing a piece from God's Spies, a blog by Thomas Newberger. It's short, it won't take too long to point up this. Okay, this is about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report. According to Tom Newberger, the report is almost complete. The products of working groups 1 and 2, the one dealing with physical science, that's WG1, and the one dealing with impacts and vulnerabilities, WG2, are already out. The report of Working Group 3 dealing with adaptation has just been released. All that remains is the synthesis report that summarizes all three. Uncharacteristically, the Working Group 3 report dealing with adaptation is dire. And Tom says all citations from this report of the IPCC will come from the summary for policymakers. And he leaves a link to the headline statements. We're not going to go through too many of them here. We're just trying to show you, if I can remember to actually get this into the stream. There it is. What I am trying to show you here is just a few of the statements. As usual, the language is dense and obtuse, though it's accurate. For example, conclusion 3, SPM, Summary for Policymakers, C3, soft limits to some human adaptation have been reached, but can be overcome by addressing a range of constraints, primarily financial, governance, institutional, and policy constraints. That conclusion is drawn with high confidence. Hard limits to adaptation have been reached in some ecosystems. That conclusion is also drawn with high confidence. With increasing global warming, losses and damages will increase, and additional human and natural systems will reach adaptation limits. That's also with high confidence. Tom Neuberger says, I have to think about that to get it. Paint a picture, it does not. Quote, hard adaptation limits includes death. And next, he cites conclusion 4. There is increased evidence of maladaptation across many sectors and regions since the 5th assessment report, AR5. He points out, or quotes, that maladaptive responses to climate change can create lock-ins of vulnerability, exposure, and risks that are difficult and expensive to change and exacerbate existing inequalities. That kind of maladaptation can be avoided by flexible, multi-sectoral, inclusive, and long-term planning and implementation of adaptation actions with benefits to many sectors and systems. That conclusion is given with high confidence. Tom Neuberger comes in again and says that maladaptation means picking a solution that locks in the problem. For example, building out 30 years of methane, which sometimes is spoken of by whom, I don't know whom, but it's sometimes characterized as America's clean energy, unquote. For example, as a solution to climate change, that is 30 years of methane, as a solution to climate change is a maladaptation. It's like switching to a different poison as you lay dying. And then conclusion 5.1, C.5.1 says, political commitment and follow through across all levels of government accelerate the implementation of adaptation actions. That's a high confidence conclusion. Implementing actions can require large upfront investments of human, financial, and technological resources. That conclusion is given with high confidence. Aren't you glad that's a high confidence conclusion? While some benefits could only become visible in the next decade or beyond, that conclusion is with medium confidence. And accelerating commitment and follow-through is promoted by rising public awareness, building business cases for adaptation, also accountability and transparency mechanisms, and monitoring and evaluation of adaptation progress, social movements, and climate-related litigation in some regions. That conclusion is given with medium confidence. He is a shorter version that you can understand better than the mouthful I just read. Tom Neuberger's shorter version, quote, politics and capital investment is needed to fix this, even if the results and return aren't obvious for a decade or more, unquote. Duh, he says. Also, quote again, it's important to build a, quote, business case, unquote, for adapting to climate change, unquote. Tom says, now that's just stupid. It's like requiring that a business case be made for a village hospital before one is built. Summary for policymakers is supposed to be the non-technical chapter for people like Joe Biden. It's almost as though they didn't want to be understood, the writers of the report, that is. And they don't. Again, see this analysis, and he refers to another blog he previously did, where he makes the case that these people from the IPCC often don't want to be understood. Then he offers in plain English, but the following makes clear how dire the situation is. From the climate-savvy analyst quoted at the top, 2025 is now a make-or-break year. The IPCC finds that globally we must reach peak greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 in order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that also delaying a peak past 2025 means unavoidable and necessary economic losses. That means if a peak is not reached by 2025 and then starts to go down, we're not going to be able to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and unnecessary economic losses and other damages are going to become more and more severe. This is from the Working Group 3 co-chair himself in an interview with The Guardian via Brad Johnson's excellent newsletter, Hill Heat. And this is quote, "It's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius," IPCC Working Group 3 co-chair Jim Skay announced today at the release of the group's the Mitigation of Climate Change report. Quote, "Without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, it will be impossible," unquote. Quote, "Now or never," said the co-author of the WG3 report, "if they could only write like they talk." Now, why is none of this hitting home? Tom Newberger explains that. The problems, of course, of these, as anyone with eyes can see. Complete political capture of the ruling class by the fossil fuel companies. Our rulers are determined to keep us on carbon till they can't. The pathological greed and hubris of the very, very rich, our rulers. The refusal of anyone with power, and certainly anyone with power in the U.S., to end fossil fuel subsidies. And the refusal, unmentioned by this report, by the wealth-controlled mainstream media, to make this seem urgent. So that's the essence, of this. It's now or never, but we have complete political capture of the ruling class by fossil fuel companies. We have the pathological greed and hubris of the very, very rich, our rulers. I mean, look at Gates, look at Musk, look at most of them. It's obvious that their greed and their hubris are pathological. And the refusal of anyone with power, and certainly anyone with power in the U.S., to end fossil fuel subsidies. And the refusal, unmentioned by this report, that is the IPCC report, by the wealth-controlled media, to make this seem as though it is urgent. The International Monetary Fund calculates worldwide subsidies for fossil fuels at $5.9 trillion in 2020. That's government subsidies for fossil fuels. That's $11 million a minute. That's what it is. Well, that does that particular piece. So, that's where we are right now. I still don't see Bob. Let me see if he tried to communicate with me in the way we were communicating by Twitter. By Twitter DM. Oh, he says, "We'll be a bit late, my friend, as I've had to get some medical attention today." Okay, so Bob is going to be a bit late. So that's okay. We still have some more to examine. Common Dreams had a piece by Kaisa Kosonen of Greenpeace. What you really know about the latest IPCC climate report. This is also Working Group 3, the Adaptation report, their assessment. Here are 6 takeaways from the IPCC report on mitigation that we think you should know. Good news, we have the solutions we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. I'm not going to read the detail of this conclusion, but that is the good news. The solutions exist, the technical solutions. Okay. Number 2, we get much more with less. By 2050, huge potential exists overall in demand-side strategies that could cut emissions by 40 to 70% compared to our current policies. This means designing and repurposing infrastructure, advancing technology adoption, and enhancing sociocultural factors. That sounds like it's Bob now. I'm going to go let him in. Sorry, I kind of screwed that up. Well, let me go back to Google and let him in. Oh, it's Lisa.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Lisa, how are you?
I am good. I apologize. Meeting ran a little over, and then I had to just take care of some things. I'm glad that your guest is yet to be here, our guest.
Yes, he had to have some medical attention today, evidently.
Oh, no.
He says that he's going to be just a little late.
Okay.
What I'm in the process of doing now is to read off some conclusions that came from a Common Dream article concerning what the takeaways are in relation to the Adaptation report, the Working Group 3's, their report on climate change and on how to mitigate it. The first conclusion, I'm going to go through the conclusions quickly now so we can start the discussion. The first conclusion is that we have the solutions we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Second, we can get much more with less. That means if we do things like repurposing infrastructure, advancing technology, technology adoption, and enhancing sociocultural factors. Let me share this.
There you go.
I can, so everybody can see it. Excuse me, this is taking a little longer. There it is. And enhancing sociocultural factors that enable and reward sustainable ways of life, from walkable and bikeable cities, and of course, electrification of self-sustaining homes, healthy plant-based diets, avoided flights, and to consumption requiring less material input as we use, repair, and improve recycling, rather than leaving it to individuals and their choices. We need systems approaches in order to do all these things. The poorest quarter of the population worldwide lack decent homes and mobility and food and will need additional energy capacity and resources for human well-being. Number 3 conclusion is money needs to be directed from the problems to the solutions. I guess a rather obvious conclusion. What that is going to boil down to, one of the things it boils down to is removing fossil fuel subsidies I just got through pointing out that fossil fuel subsidies cost governments $5.9 trillion per year. Number 4, current national targets and policies are a recipe for failure and must fundamentally improve. Not a single country is yet reducing emissions at a speed required by the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. There are misaligned policies leading to misaligned financial flows into the fossil fuel economy, when in reality there's no room for any new fossil fuel infrastructure at all. There are already enough coal plants and other fossil fuel infrastructure in place to take us above 1.5 degrees Celsius. Those with high emissions, this is number 5, have higher potential and responsibility for emission cuts too. Households with income in the top 10% contribute about 36 to 45% of global emissions worldwide. 2/3 of these households are living in the developed countries and 1/3 in other economies. Those with high emissions have a higher potential for emissions reductions too, while still maintaining good living standards and well-being. Equity and justice are overall essential conditions for effective climate policy and for securing national and international support for deep decarbonization. Given the differences in current and historical emissions contributions, degree of vulnerability and impacts, as well as capacities within and between nations, accelerated international cooperation, including on finance, is a critical enabler of low carbon and just transitions. And finally, the 6th of the takeaways: the seeds of transformative change have already been planted. Now it's all hands on deck. Where have I heard that before? Shifting to a sustainable future will require transformative changes that disrupt existing trends. It takes technological, systemic, and cultural changes, for which we need both consistent action from politicians and other decision makers, as well as public pressure and social movements. Now, this article is just a little more complicated than the first one I read. That is really pretty plain. What it says is that according to the co-chair of Working Group 3 that issued the IPCC report, we now have a situation where it's now or never to do anything about this. So the question arises. It seems clear that the most important element of public purpose right now is to do something about this. When the scientists are telling you it's now or never, this is the first time they've brought forth a report, the IPCC, that is so dire. Now, other organizations have, but this is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the UN. Their conclusions have a lot of input from governments and have always been conservatively biased. If they say that it's now or never, it's likely worse than it's now or never. So we have to mobilize and we have to do something about this. So what is it that we are going to do? We want to look at this from an MMT lens. This program is in the MMT in the Public Purpose series. What would MMT have to say about this? The general MMT approach says that it isn't about the dollars, folks. The dollars, as long as your nation is a monetary sovereign, can always be found. There are also a sufficient number of monetary sovereigns in the world that they could finance what has to be done in other countries, so that worldwide there is enough sheer financial power to adapt to this particular situation. Now, there are estimates of how much this is going to cost for the United States. Remember, Bernie Sanders in 2020 put an estimate out, $16.2 trillion over 10 years would have to be spent. And that was for a situation not as dire as this one. Now, this is the first time an organization such as the UN has come out and has said that by 2025, we have to reach the peak of emissions. 2025 has to have the highest level of greenhouse gas emissions ever. In 2025, it has to begin to go down. So we have to bring it up short right now. We have no more time. So if there are no financial barriers, what would the barriers be from an MMT point of view? The barriers would be resources. As I said, there are a lot of financial estimates that are out there. I've seen $10 trillion estimates. I've seen the $16.2 trillion estimates. I saw the estimate, that was given by Howie Hawkins in his program of $42 trillion. A conservative organization, the American, it's something like AAFA. It's an organization run by a conservative economist by the name of Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He came up with a cost of getting the Green New Deal done of $91 trillion. And of course, he's going absolutely crazy over $91 trillion. It can never be done. He said, forget about it. Just forget about it. He didn't say go die, but he might as well have said, go die. It's just impossible. It's not going to happen. There was a report put out by MMTers, by Yever Nersessian, and Randy Ray, not too long ago, in 2019. There was a detailed report, and there was also a summary report. The summary, both reports came from the Levy Institute, and the title of the summary report was, Can We Afford the Green New Deal? And the approach that was taken there by Yeva and Randy was precisely the approach I spoke of. It was about paying attention not to the dollars, not to the size of the deficits, because these would vary according to various happenings in the economy as we implemented the plan. And of course, since the U.S. is a monetary sovereign, we could always pay for whatever we had to pay for. So the money was not, from their standpoint, the problem. The problem was estimating the kinds of resources we would have to get to a Green New Deal. In their paper, they made an attempt to come up with estimates for the resources that would be needed, the kinds of resources, okay, that would be needed to get to the goals of the Green New Deal and to bring everything into line. This was the first thing I'd ever seen that actually involved the estimates of the real resources that were going to be needed. It doesn't claim that it's completely accurate. It does claim that it's somewhere in the ballpark of what is going to be needed to get to a zero emissions system. But it was not only about some estimates of money, that would be involved, but there would be other things that were going to be needed too, in order to get there. One of those other things was a universal single-payer system or Medicare for All program. What Yeva and Randy have to say about that, is that it's deemed to be the most expensive of the Green New Deal programs. However, as they explain, in their paper on this, with respect to Medicare for All, we find a source of resources in real terms. They point out the U.S. healthcare system is notorious for its high costs and below par results. They say we already spend 18% of GDP on healthcare, and that is projected to reach 20% soon. Of course, I've said this quite a number of times in my live streams. They point out this is approximately twice as much as our peers, the other rich developed capitalist countries, with no discernibly better health outcomes on our part, and even worse on a number of measures. We have twice the expenditures, or nearly twice the expenditures, and no better or worse outcomes in certain areas, such as life expectancy, for example. We're way behind some of the other countries by 4 or 5 years in certain instances. And why is this? Because of for-profit insurance, higher pharmaceutical and provider costs, and higher administrative costs. We've talked a lot about that here, concerning that. But we are much higher than some of the other countries. So one of the prime things we have to do in order to recapture some real resources is to get the Medicare for All passed. The second thing we have to do is end the forever wars. This will reduce environmental destruction and free up resources for the Green New Deal, they say. They point out it's hard to calculate the resources that we're using for the military at this point. If we look at it in dollars, the reported spending on defense is $716 billion. Of course, this was written in 2019, so it's now up to $780 billion, of which the actual reported spending on the war itself was about 10%, or 72 million. Sorry, 72 billion. Much more is hidden, and the figure doesn't include indirect costs like treating veterans and their families, Okay, and military spending does not lead to production of output for civilian consumption. So it's more like transfer payments to other nations. So its inflationary impact is not as much as it might otherwise be, but there's probably, they estimate, at least $1 trillion of unproductive military spending annually. That was as of 2019. In 2008, Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, projected the cost of the Iraq War alone would run about $3 trillion. 2 years later, he argued that could be an underestimate. Senator Rand Paul thought the war on terror had cost $6 trillion since 2001, or about $330 billion a year. Bernie Sanders put the cost at $5 trillion already, with another $1 trillion to be spent on health care for veterans over the future. So these forever wars are very, very expensive, not in dollars primarily. We're not worried about the dollars. We can always generate those. We're talking resources. The dollar quotes here are a way of expressing the resources that were used. We need to achieve net zero carbon emissions, in agriculture. And here some GND supporters have recognized achieving carbon neutrality will require a major reduction of agriculture emissions, a reduction of greenhouse gases produced by livestock. And they talk about that for a while, and what kinds of savings of resources that would be. And if we did that, that would save lots and lots, of resources. They go into other things. For example, the expenditures on the things we have to do to bring forth, a Green New Deal. One suggestion for many people, of course, is taxing the rich. If we find resources are released from destructive uses and mobilized, and they're not sufficient to meet the requirements of GND programs, then inflation pressures are going to arise. We don't know how large those are going to be, but if we do face inflation, we need to have a plan for addressing it. Many advocate raising taxes on the rich to provide the revenue to finance the Green New Deal, but as we explained in this policy brief, the function of taxes is to release resources rather than raise revenue. Hence, the type of taxes we use becomes an important consideration. For instance, taxes such as financial transaction taxes and offshore income taxes would have little benefit from the standpoint of releasing resources, since they may not be very effective in reducing spending and hence releasing resources for the Green New Deal. Ironically, those kinds of taxes are often cited by Green New Deal proponents as particularly good sources of finance. Proponents like Bernie, for example. Taxing the rich can release resources if it reduces their spending on resource-using output. Direct taxes on income and wealth can also reduce inequality at the top. If resource use by the rich can be reduced, that will free up resources to be used in GND projects. Instead of building a third or fourth mansion for the rich, public housing for the poor could be provided. Instead of refueling and producing private jets, efficient forms of mass transit could be built and operated. The potential release of resources could be significant. However, to obtain these advantages would require high tax rates on both wealth and income, perhaps even higher than what AOC has advocated. She advocated for a marginal tax rate, top rate of 70%. They point out the political and technical barriers to imposing sufficiently high tax rates would also be significant. The rich have the means and incentive to fight any move to raise their taxes, as well as to avoid payments if tax rates are raised. Will not attempt to calculate how many resources might be made available because the uncertainty of passing tax hikes is too great. Will focus instead on alternative ways of combating inflation should it arise. One is taxes on consumption and on wages. That's highly effective in lowering demand, but they won't be politically popular nor especially fair, given the stagnant wages for the last 50 years. Workers have been paying for neoliberalism for 2 generations. We cannot ask them to pay more to reverse the damages done. He thus proposed a policy along the lines of Keynes's recommendation to pay for the Second World War. When that was applied to the Green New Deal war to save the planet, they concluded that we needed to reduce resource consumption. We would need targeted taxes that would be effective in lowering aggregate demand. We need to reduce consumption demand by the less fortunate bottom 90% of Americans. However, this should be imposed in a progressive manner with exemptions for the lowest income earners, the poorest people, that is. Any reduction of consumption should only be temporary and accompanied by a clear promise of a better standard of living at a later time. Senator Sanders has formulated a plan to pay for Medicare for all, proposing a supplemental payroll tax on employers equal to an additional 6.2% of payroll, plus an additional payroll tax surcharge on employees of 2.2%, plus an array of other progressive taxes that he projected would raise $1.4 trillion annually. While we don't agree with his goal of raising revenue to pay for programs, we follow his lead in designing a method of reducing consumption to alleviate inflationary pressure. To allay fears of inflation, we propose to repurpose the payroll tax part of Senator Sanders' proposal. We would impose an average surcharge of 4.6% on the employee portion of the payroll tax. This could be applied in a progressive manner with a lower surcharge on lower wages and with the lowest wages exempt. The goal is not to raise funds to pay for benefits, but rather to defer employee compensation based on Keynes's plan for World War II. In this case, the purpose of the tax is to temporarily reduce workers' compensation. Over time, Social Security benefits would be raised to compensate workers for their sacrifice during the implementation of the GND projects that are required to reverse climate change. The payroll tax surcharge on workers could be phased out in the future as the Green New Deal's resource demands decline and as the nation's productive capacity increases. As Keynes said, deferred compensation given as a boost to Social Security benefits can be allocated in a progressive manner with larger supplements paid to those currently receiving the lowest retirement benefits, tapering down for those earning the highest. Also, as Keynes said, the payroll surcharge, similar to his capital levy, would be imposed as soon as the GND begins, while the benefit supplements will be delayed until the inflation danger has passed. The surcharges paid by employees would also be phased out only after inflation pressures subside. So I'm not going to go through the rest of this, but you get the point. Certain funds would be siphoned off but compensated for labor, okay, in order to avoid inflationary pressures. Okay. Also, it's possible to use imports as a source of resources to meet higher demand. They say we should not excessively rely on imports of the production needed for greening projects, such as solar panels, wind power equipment, and electronic transportation, at least to the extent that other countries, okay, are able to provide them. But we need to mobilize some of these to use their resources to fight climate change here, but they will need to mobilize them to use them to fight climate change themselves. However, as employment rises to boost general consumption, at least some of that will be met by imported consumer goods. This is not necessarily something to be avoided, as many nations need to export consumer products to obtain dollar earnings they need to import green technology. This will help to attenuate inflation pressure as it has done over the past 2 decades. Then they draw certain conclusions. With appropriate policies, Keynes thought we could snatch from the exigency of war positive social improvements. The same thing is true today. We can either be reactive and respond to the calamities created by climate change as they happen, as we already do with droughts and hurricanes, or we can use this crisis as an opening for progressive change. This is why the Green New Deal includes a wide range of social initiatives: jobs for all, ending the forever wars, taxing the rich, and student debt relief, free public colleges, access to child and elder care, and so on. At the same time, we need to plan for the implementation of these GND components on a pace that does not significantly raise inflation. What Keynes was arguing against and how to pay for the war was the policy of allowing the economy to adjust to the realities of war through an inflation tax. If we do have to fight inflation, we need to ensure the battle is not waged on the backs of workers. The inflation tax permanently lowers consumption. Deferred compensation only postpones consumption. Table 2 provides resource numbers for each category, the resources that are released, the resources needed, and the net increase in the demand for resources. Our plan would be approximately net zero in terms of resource use if we impose the payroll tax. And there are estimates given as a percent of GDP. For example, the job guarantee would consume 1% of GDP. Greening projects would consume 5.0% of GDP. The Medicare for All program would add to resource space because it would free up 3.7%, okay, of resources. I have to add here, that's a very conservative estimate. They go so far as to say that once this has been going for a few years and Medicare for All has settled in, as much as 7 to 10%, okay, of GDP could be added to resources, because those are the resources that would be freed up by the Medicare for All program. Then there are miscellaneous GND projects which would be neutral in terms of resources, either adding to resources or freeing up any resources. Ending the forever wars would free up 1.0% of GDP, okay, in resources. And the payroll tax surcharge, they propose, would have the effect of subtracting, freeing up 2% of resources to be used, okay, for other purposes. So the net increase in resource use without the payroll tax surcharge would be 1.3% of GDP. The net increase in resource use with the payroll tax surcharge would be minus 0.7. In other words, it would free up minus 0.7% of GDP, okay, in resources. Okay, so it's very easy to notice that if we get into higher savings from the Medicare for All program and from ending the forever wars, if that goes up to 7 to 10%, in that situation, there would be no need for the payroll tax surcharge. In other words, we might start off with the payroll tax surcharge, but it might be possible to relax it in just, okay, a few years. So that's the kind of thinking that you see from the MMTers about this. That when looked at in terms of the resources we're going to free up and the resources that could be used, there are plenty of resources to do a Green New Deal program here in the United States. We do not need to wait. We do not need to wait to help other nations in the world that are going to need help. So, I haven't really gone through this in detail. Okay, I'm not going to do that. What I was interested in was conveying the point that when you look at this from a resource point of view and from a point of view of the freeing up the real resources that exist in the economy, there is no doubt that we can afford a Green New Deal. And there's no doubt, based on the IPCC report, that we need the Green New Deal, including Medicare for All, right now. That we have to have a situation of peak emissions as of 2025. So, unfortunately, Bob but could not be here. Evidently, I don't know if he still is planning to arrive, okay, or not. He may not be. I'm going to check my Twitter feed and see if he's had something more to say about that. No, his last message was at 8:38, saying he was going to be a bit late because he had to get some medical attention today. So I guess he may, or may not be here. I thought he would have a lot to say about the freeing up, okay, of resources because he's very strong, in the MMT field. He might also have, I know he would have alternative suggestions to those, okay, of Yevon Nersessian, okay, and Randy Ray in terms of how to do that, because he's written on that particular subject. But I'm not going to take any more time on that. I want to shift to something that Lisa and I have spent some time, okay, in talking about, and that is consideration of how we get beyond the current politics, the political situation we find ourselves in, so we can start taking the actions we need to take to pass a Green New Deal, including Medicare for All. So, Lisa, I have monopolized this for long enough. Please take it away.
Okay. Uh, I'm listening to you, and I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, we know what we have to do. We're stuck in this situation where we have uh, a administration and a government, politicians whom are in control that don't seem to feel that there's anything we need to do. Um, and it's been heavy on my head for the last, I don't know, maybe couple weeks now. Um, just even the fact that we are in, in this place where we want to stoke the fires of this conflict in Ukraine, with weapons for defense and all of that, right? Which um, is, whether you believe that that is a good course of action or you believe in diplomacy, we are where we are. And what is happening now, I noticed, is that they're going to start releasing the ethanol, which is dirty gas, period. Here in Pennsylvania, there was added a gas tax to remove the ethanol. I know that not every state does that, but that's what we've got here. So now they're going to pump the ethanol back into circulation, and I'm sure that they're not going to relieve the tax. So basically, uh, we're not going to save a dime at the pump, and we're going to get dirty gas for the summer. We're going the wrong way here. And we've talked about this over and over again. There really isn't any other way to do this uh, that isn't going to involve us making some very difficult choices when we go to the polls. In some cases, it's going to be easy, but everybody's going to have to be responsible for looking into who it is that they're voting for and what their options are. Um, you're going to have to know who your candidates are, and you're going to have to know what they support, what they don't support, who they're taking money from, if you can find that out. Uh, and if they're incumbents, or if they're a member of one of the committees, uh, power players in Washington, basically, we're recommending that you don't vote for them, because the only chance we're going to have at changing or shaking anything up is to change the power structure. I mean, because we all know what works. What we've got is a total lack of will to acknowledge, let alone address anything that needs to be done. We're going absolutely in the opposite direction.
Absolutely. What I read earlier from Tom Newberger, of the Gods, the Spies blog, is very relevant here. The problems we have in meeting the climate crisis and in implementing the Green New Deal as outlined by the MMTers, the kinds of things we have to do to meet that. We cannot do that because of the complete capture of the political class, of the ruling class, by the fossil fuel companies. Our rules are determined to keep us on carbon until they can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The pathological greed and hubris of the very, very rich, our rulers, the refusal of anyone with power, and certainly anyone with power in the United States, to end fossil fuel subsidies. Those subsidies, I said, were at $5.9 trillion a year. That's a lot of resources. Negative for climate change, expelled into the environment. And the refusal, unmentioned in the IPCC report, of the wealth controlled media, the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
They will never say, they will never admit that this is urgent, no matter what the IPCC scientists have to say. Now, scientists are now beginning to go into the street in order to try.
chaining themselves to buildings.
Yes. We also have to go into the streets and join them and make this a mass uprising. Only mass protests, okay, and mass uprising will create part of the pressure we need. But the other part of the pressure we need, as Lisa says, has to come from the voters. They have to study whether candidates running for office in their districts are people who've been bought by the fossil fuel companies, are people who've been bought by the health insurance industry. Because remember, Medicare for All is part of the Green New Deal. It's a vital part because of all the resources it is going to save. So it's very vital that those power centers be reduced in Congress. That means the incumbents who serve those power centers must be dumped, and the challengers who are also bought by those power centers have to be dumped as well, and other people have to be elected to end the forever wars, which is another way of eating up these resources at a huge rate. To end the forever wars, we have to get rid of this whole foreign policy establishment. Look at what it's done with respect to the Ukraine. I mean, these people came into office with Biden, and when it comes to foreign policy, they're even worse than Trump's people. They came in with a determination to weaken or destroy Russia and to manufacture incidents inside the Ukraine to force a confrontation between Russia and Europe in order to prevent a collaboration of Russia, okay, and Europe that would create a power center that would rival the United States. That's what this is about in the Ukraine. It's what this foreign policy team had in mind from day one. They were sitting there for 4 years. They were present, of course, in the Obama administration. Obama was holding them in check. But they were sitting out there in think tanks for 4 years until Trump could be defeated, so they could come in and implement their much more aggressive foreign policy than Trump's. Compared to them, Trump was a pussycat in foreign policy. The military-industrial complex, once again, is more powerful than anything else right now. Their power can also be reduced by voting against the people who represent them, whether incumbents or challengers. Okay, if we notice again, or we bring to mind again, the resource savings that I was talking about, the main areas of resource savings are in the medical area, the health industrial complex, and the military industrial complex in the deep state. The way we're using those resources now is standing in the way of mobilizing resources to implement the Green New Deal.
You know, Joe, I think we need to get the anti-war movement back on the streets. Because until we do, I mean, that really kind of right now is the thing that is keeping us from even talking about what's wrong here. And the you know, there's 40 countries who are, you know, not in this space of wanting to perpetuate this conflict. And we don't hear about it because we've got corporate owned news media. Just, you know, I'm not telling anybody listening to this anything new that they don't know. I'm just stating the obvious here. But the rest of the world needs to see us wanting the same things that they want. The UN, begging, saying it's now or never. I mean, we knew that. I mean, I've got some environmental scientists that are my daughter's friends, and they were saying a year and a half ago that we need to go carbon negative now. Now, that was a year and a half ago. We've gone the absolute wrong way. We were in a shutdown. We reduced our carbon emissions by 50% when the world went into lockdown. It's not that we can't do it. We just don't have the political will to make it happen. But the rest of the world needs to know that there are people here who don't want this, because all that's coming out in the news and in the papers is just, you know, everybody just thinks we're all good with this, and we're not, and we all know we're not. But we've got to unite. We've got to unite. We've got to get the climate activists and the anti-war activists and the healthcare activists and everybody, the 10 demands folks, you know, everybody. This is all the same thing. This is the power structure that rules us, and we've all got to come together and realize that it is a class war.
And we have to remove the power structure from the Congress so laws can be passed that are in the interests of people.
Right.
Power structure has the Congress by the throat now, but we can do something about that. Not so much by voting for people. Voting for people comes next. But what comes first is voting against people. Simply determining that the people who are incumbents now and the people from other major parties who want to succeed them, that they are unacceptable because they're bought by the power structure.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
judgment that we have to make. Then we can decide who among the people who are not bought by the power structure are the best ones for us. There are two
Yeah,
levels
because
of decision making here. But until we get rid of the first level, until we go through that, we cannot get to the second level.
Joe's been saying this, and he's right. We've got to do it. We have to make an impact, and we were talking about this, and one of the most poignant things that we could do would be to upseat the committees, the major committees in Congress, and both the Senate and the House, turn them upside down, go after the committees, because going after everybody's tough. We still pursue that, let everybody know this is what you want to do. But truthfully, I would love to see a campaign where we target the damn committees, all of them, because it's a smaller number of people. We can focus on it. We can get that word out. People can start helping us promote that kind of thing. Still with the idea that you do your homework on what your choices are and who you're going to vote for. But truthfully, Joe, I really think we've got to go after the committees. We have to. We have to let everybody know that that's what we're doing.
But let us be clear. Okay. The committee heads.
It's not good enough. It's got to be the whole damn committee.
All they'll do, okay, is appoint, a new committee. So the point is, they can't be allowed to appoint a new committee of people who are already bought.
I agree with you, Joe, but here's the thing. The people that run those committees, that's an infrastructure. They don't let people in, right? If you turn over a whole committee, they're floundering. They got to go at it again. They have a committee in play, right? You take out the committee itself, the whole
You
damn
could
thing.
really, if you take out the key committees, there's lots and lots of disruption.
Yes, huge, huge. And it gives the
Right.
Congress some momentum because they're floundering in the background.
So let us sit down and decide which committees we want to target. In other words, which committees are blocking progress in key areas the most, and go after those committees. But we also have to be sure when we go after those committee members that we are also making sure that their successors on those committees are not people who are bought.
I'm not so sure that we're going to have a lot of control over one or the other. What I'm trying to say here, truthfully, is from an operational standpoint, if we can effectively get enough new people into Congress and disrupt the damn committees that sit on legislation, right? And that come up with new stuff that is going to sidetrack everybody, like, the idea here is to slow them down, and to slow them down long enough to get something accomplished and to give power back to the Congress from the standpoint of, you've got some time. Now move, right? And we've got to get Nancy out of there. I mean, that's a given. Okay.
Absolutely. We
That's a
absolutely have to
damned given.
there. Absolutely.
But
We have to
but
get Nancy out, and her whole leadership team has to go.
we've got to get new people in there. And we've got to get rid of people like Richie Neal, like Mr. Perry, is that his name? That sat on what was it? Oh, damn it. Homeland Security, Senate.
Homeland Security.
Johnson, and who was the other one? Perry? What's his last name? Scott Perry, am I right?
No, not
Co-chair with Ron Johnson. Homeland Security.
of the co-chair of the Homeland Security committee,
The Democrat.
the Democrat. I'm not sure who that is.
It's Perry, I think. Anyway, those are the types of things that we need to do. We need to go after the committee heads, but we need to go after as many of them as we possibly can. We need to list them. We need to talk about why. We need to talk about what they've done, what they haven't done.
Okay,
We don't want
we
Connor
have
Lamb
get
getting elected because he'll take over for Manchin.
yes,
These are the things that we need to talk about, why they are
right.
critical.
But also in 2024, we have to get rid, of Manchin. He is the chair.
Manchin might be running for governor. We need to get rid of Lamb. We need to make damn sure he's not elected. We need
I'm
Fetterman.
all for getting rid of Lamb. We're in complete agreement about that. We don't want Lamb to win. We got to block that. Absolutely. But with respect to Manchin in 2024, he is the chair of the Energy Resources and Commerce Committee. I think it's called that, in the
Yeah.
Senate. And
Yeah.
from that perch, he can block the Green New Deal. So he has to be a target. We absolutely have to get rid of him in 2024. Okay. We do have to sit down and decide on which committees we're going to target, to try to overturn.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but that's what we need to do. We need to look at that, look at it hard. We need to make some hard decisions on, what are we going to run up the flagpole? Because it's too broad not to actually target and explain why these people need to be primaried, right? And then you're going to get some momentum once we are able to explain to people what these people have done, because a lot of people don't know committees and what people in those committees have done.
Oh, they don't.
But we can create some of that. We can talk about, like, Pat Toomey stepping down, but man, I could load up the whole 9 yards of all the rotten, nasty things that he's done to make people's lives miserable. Those, I think, are the kinds of things that we could do to get some momentum behind, vote for Shahid. Don't vote for Nancy. Richie Neal, who's running against Richie Neal? You got to get him out of the way. Go through all of that stuff.
It's awful. Nobody this year is running against him. As far as I know, he's getting off scot-free.
Well, who's in Massachusetts that we can run against him?
I don't know who's in his district. The guy he ran against before,
We just need
Alex
an
Morris,
independent. Is it too late to even get signatures
went
on the ballot?
to another district. He was basically run out of the district, by those incidents. And he went to settle somewhere else, in Massachusetts. He was a great candidate. Who else is in that district? I don't know who else is in that district.
We just
Nobody
need,
has stepped up to contest him this time.
well, it's those kinds of discussions that we need to have. We need to get a little bit more narrow. We need a little bit more. We got to pare this down a little bit and get a little bit more focused. And we have to hurry because
I
primary
agree. We
season
have
is
to
upon
hurry
us.
because 2025.
Well, I'm talking about congressional run now too. Right now, we're talking about congressional and Senate. Right?
Yes,
We've got Senate
yeah,
committees and we've
right.
got congressional committees, and we have to work both sides.
I agree.
Anyway, the truth of the matter is, we know what we've got to do from an MMT perspective, from reducing. We've got to go carbon negative, and there are things that we can do to reduce carbon emissions very quickly, but not with the people that we have sitting on these committees right now. Not
Exactly.
without a shit ton of
Right.
pressure, which
Right.
means
Exactly. We know
streets.
what to do from a scientific point of view. We know what to do from a policy point of view. We've got to figure out, though, exactly what we should be doing, the optimum things we should be doing from a strictly political point of view, okay, in relation to mass protests and in relation to the elections of 2022.
And then at the state level, people have to be doing the same thing, right? Your
Right.
state elections, you've got to be looking at it from the same perspective. Who's taking money and who can you vote? And let's be honest, Joe. People are going to have to make some tough choices. Sometimes there is no great choice, right? That's just the truth. However,
Yeah, for example, in Pennsylvania, with respect to Connor Lamb, his opponent, John Fetterman, has a little. He's good in many ways, but he has a little problem with respect to Medicare for all. So
well, I think that Fetterman's coming around in that regard. Um, there was a big article about this that I think you saw. Um, I don't know. Here's what I will tell you though, is that Fetterman is a man of the people. He is rumored to support Medicare for all. They're painting him as a socialist here because he supports it. Now, if you go to his website, he doesn't have the words Medicare for all there. He doesn't have the word single payer there either. Okay. Um, I'm more in tune with this than anybody because I would love to be going full bore, full on John Fetterman, but as a single payer healthcare activist, I'm kind of screwed,
you're
right?
stuck.
Until he comes out and says single payer is the way to go or puts it on his website. I don't care which, but he's running in a heavy red. A lot of the places that he's got to win to win on the ballot are Republican heavy rural areas, right? So he's the politician. He's the one that's got to win it. Um, he's raised more money than Lamb, and the latest polling is that he's still way out ahead of.
How far out ahead is he? Is he
He's
still?
still he's still
Is he still
30. If it
30
didn't even,
points ahead?
it might have even creeped up a little bit.
Oh,
But
good.
who knows, right? I don't know who the hell they're calling. They never call me. They never call anybody I know. Um, so in that regard, though, uh, he's not necessarily an incumbent. Lamb's the one that's been on the hill. He just wants to switch houses, switch chambers. Fetterman is a man of the people. He lives in Braddock. It is one of the most disenfranchised and has been for as long as I've lived communities in Pittsburgh. He's been on the right side of just about everything except single payer health care, as far as I know. Now I have heard that he had there's some question about some things he's done in the past, but he is totally on board with the situation with the climate. He's labor friendly. He's, police reform, all of it. As much progressivism as we have here, he's been behind all of it. Now, we live in this little incubator where they did this monster ACO headquarters and monster MCO headquarters, and it changed the dynamic of the economy in Pittsburgh. And I can kind of understand where these politicians are coming from. It brought a lot of tech in here. It brought a lot well, we've got a world renowned healthcare system headquartered in Allegheny County, and it's really hard to buck that system. They've got the colleges that, feed in, they've got the medical school here. There's a lot, and the biggest employer here is healthcare. All of that said, I'd love to see them come out for single payer, right? But I'm in a closed primary state as well. So I do not have the luxury of voting for anyone but my party registration when I go to a primary. Okay. And then you end up with any independent that ends up on the ballot in the general. Last time they took Howie Hawkins off the ballot here in Pennsylvania for the presidential run. You couldn't vote for him. That's the kind of garbage we play with here. A lot of people aren't in close primary states though. And if you're not in a close primary state, then you have all kinds of options of how you want to do this primary thing. Just know who you're voting for. Know who they are. If you've got questions, ask them, right? If people have
Right.
questions,
And
send them our way.
know who they are taking money from.
Mhm.
That's very
Mhm.
important. Go to opensecrets.org, see what you can find out there.
Well, and sometimes that's not even going to tell you anything. You're going to have to look into their record on how they vote. You're going to have to look at their voting record.
Oh
And
yeah,
there are ways to do that as well, but the best thing to do really, and we've been talking about this, is just dump all of the incumbents, but that's easier said than done. Sometimes there is no good option.
right. But even when you're following the rule of dumping the incumbents, uh, you still have to do some research on the challenges, see who is supporting the challenges, who their PACs are, who their major contributions are. There is a lot of information on Open Secrets, okay, with respect to that. As long as you're following the general rule that if they're taking money from large corporations, if they're taking money from PACs, if you think of those as disqualifying the criteria, then it becomes a lot simpler to find out whether they're doing that.
Well, if they're taking money from the party, they're taking all kinds of money from PACs and corporations too, and you can't find that. That's why I'm saying you've got to do a little bit
Well,
more
you can
digging.
usually find that if a challenger is being supported by the party, okay, uh, others at primary time, there are a number of candidates who are running. Very often, there's a candidate that's a favorite, okay, of the party, that one party, or the other party, and is taking money from the party committees. So when that happens, you know that that candidate uh, uh, is bought. If someone's running, okay, as an independent, or someone, okay, is running as a Democrat and is taking only small donations, then you can see that too. Okay,
Yeah,
and the thing
but
is
it's
to
pretty
steer
hard.
clear of those who are taking money from the party.
It's usually your local uh, Democratic committee or Republican committee is going to have information on the candidates that are running as well. I don't know how well you can decipher what comes out of those. Mine can be kind of tricky where I live. Um, but there's always a good uh, there's always usually good information coming out of anybody who's running as an independent because they have to talk about a little bit more on their websites about who they are and what they're all about, and they're going to work the people more because that's how they're going to raise their money. Um, and then just pay attention to what the local scene is on what the primary is shaping up like. If anybody's got a lot of money dumping in at the last minute, they're easily bought, um, you know, that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, I think we should look at comments.
I've been looking.
You've been looking. Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning and let's see what they are. We got Brandy here, Dolores K, Jeff Denton. Hi, Jeff. It's good to see you back. Okay, Evelina says, isn't 2025 less than 3 years from now? Yes, Evelina, it's less than 3 years from now. We're out of time. We're just out of time. Okay.
I can
Steve,
still hear.
okay, Steve Wolfbrand says, fusion success could solve all of this, but it always seems 20 years off in the future. Several breakthroughs have been lately, though. Fingers crossed. It's not going to happen, okay, in enough time, Steve. And even when it does, certain issues have still to be resolved. When it comes to fusion. Steve Woolman says, how about technologies to take carbon out of the air? Those are at the wish list stage right now. There are no proven technologies that can take the large quantities out of the air that we need to have them take out. That is not something that's viable in the next 5 years. I don't even think it's viable in the next 10 years. I think it's coming about really too late to save us.
I just heard something about fusion, and I can't remember if it came. I can't remember the politician. It was a European politician who was talking about it. It might have been Giannis, but I might be all wet on this. I can't remember. But there was a piece that was just done, a video. It was a YouTube video talking about fusion. And there was some progress on it. And I also saw something about a carbon removal process that seemed to be promising. But again, I have not been home for almost 10 days. I mean, I have for a minute here and there, but I've been on the road so much that I can't put my fingers on it. But they are talking about some things, Joe.
Oh, I know. I know they're talking about it. I generally keep track of that stuff. It all seems to, it seems to me to be still too distant to have any effect over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And we need to move more quickly than that, I think.
I still say we've got to get in the streets. We've got to wake up the old hippies and get that anti-war movement on the streets. It's a perfect opportunity to talk to people about labor and healthcare and everything else. But we've got to get in the streets. While COVID numbers are down, we've got to get in the streets because they're going to go back up again.
Right. And of course, the Red Berets were hitting the streets this past weekend, okay, on Saturday. Okay.
Yes, we were.
Right.
And we made a lot of good coalition building that weekend as well.
Yes, I think we did. I think everything was extremely promising, but of course the turnouts were still low. People are not getting into the streets, and they need to get into the streets.
Yeah, well, Buffalo in April during a sleeting storm is not necessarily conducive to getting people off the couch.
I noticed that.
That's really honest. That's being
Yes.
brutally honest.
Yes. Okay. I noticed that. Okay. I don't know how many people were at the Sacramento rally. Do you?
I didn't hear any numbers per se, but the people that did show up were activists, which is always a good thing
Yeah,
because
they were
there's
activists, and the speeches were good. I thought, for the most part. Okay, I really liked almost all the speeches. Um, I think that Sukuru put together a very good group of people. The organization was good. The sound quality was extremely good. But we don't have any idea about how many people actually showed up for the rally. Uh, Okay, in my activism, I come out of the 1960s, and
Yeah, people had decent jobs and houses weren't so expensive. I mean, they've really got us by, you know what, with people having to work and not having any time off, and nobody works 8 hours a day anymore. The 8 hour day is gone. All of that is playing in here. But you know, I would say that everybody's got to pick at least three protests in the summer that they're going to show up to. And if you've got the opportunity to do it, do it. If you're going to a baseball game, you can march on the way to the damn stadium, carry your signs, scream and yell, take your damn bullhorn. You can do those kinds of things. You can take a bullhorn and riot up the people in the crowd over a political issue. There's all kinds of opportunity if you get yourself out there. Once you do it, it's like it's a bug you catch. It really is. You catch that bug and you're going to want to be out there more. And you don't have to, when you've got thousands of people walking into a stadium, there's no such thing as needing a permit, right? You just get up, like here, we get up on the bridge and you start yelling at people and you carry your signs and you chant and you sing a song or whatever. And you just get people's attention. And then people walk up to you and say, "What is this about?" And you pass out your literature and you tell people, "Hey, we're going to have a rally over here next week, or we're convening over here. Here's where we meet, or join us on Action Network, or sign up and register to vote and vote for Fetterman." All of those things can be done when the hockey team is practicing, when the Pirates are coming into the stadium, all of that stuff. We've got a AAA or we've got a AA team here now. A lot of the little towns have the AA baseball teams and the AA hockey teams, and they practice. When you get to August and then you've got people practicing, the football teams are practicing, there's crowds that go there. You've got all kinds of things that are going to open up again this year. The amusement parks are going to have people in lines getting in and out of them. Just think about where people are going and be there.
there's also some good news today from John Campbell. Uh, it looks like the BA2 is the dominant strain right now. Has become the dominant strain. The increases, in hospitalizations are barely perceptible so far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it doesn't look like we're going to have the spikes that they had over in Europe over BA2. I don't know exactly why. He doesn't know, exactly why, but it's just, sort of looking that way. For some reason, we're escaping the worst effects, of BA2. Which doesn't mean we're not getting BA2, but it doesn't seem to be sending people to the hospital. And I think the fatality rates are still going down. Kay says we need single payer now. Steve Wolfman says about half dozen things we need to do to save ourselves. Joe just listed them. Basically, Bernie's old platform. It's similar to Bernie's old platform, but I think goes further with respect to agriculture and things like that. It certainly goes further in including Medicare for all clearly as part of the Green New Deal. Medicare for all, a job guarantee, and ending the forever wars. Those are included as part of the Green New Deal. That's important to recognize.
Robert, you've got the right idea with the baseball team and the Kings. I mean, that is the easiest thing for me. I can hit up 40,000 people when and sometimes in late August and early September, we've got baseball and football at the games going on at the same time, and Pittsburgh's in gridlock. You hit the parking lots where everybody's tailgating. Those are the kinds of things you have to think about.
Thank you, Lisa. Steve Wolfbrand says, yeah, Red Berets, Hull, Washington, knit to the revolution. Very good people. You bet, very good people.
Thank you, Steve.
You
We
bet.
have to have Steve on here, Joe. I want to have Steve on here. I want to have Steve on here for a while.
Hey, Steve, you want to come on sometime? We'll have you as a guest. If you want to come on, just leave a comment, and we'll do that soon.
We
A
should have
test
Robert on here
installs the
too.
residential home is great. Solar panels with the charger and wall batteries. Perfect. But I live in an apartment. How do I charge? Um, 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 how do I charge an electric vehicle? Uh, they will be establishing, okay, a network of charging stations. That's another thing we have to get the Congress on the move about. But and if we do it right, there could be a lot of charging stations available that will do very rapid charging, like charging in 15 minutes or something like that. Okay, it says they need to put solar on the roof of this. I'm not sure I got that, Kate. I think there were typos in that. And Steve says they're going to get us killed in a nuclear war. Oh, these people are really, really insane.
I don't think that the UN's going to let that happen. Do you guys know who Claire Daly is? If you don't, look her up. She's a MEP for the
For
EU.
Ireland, I think.
EU Parliament, yes. And she is amazing. She's amazing. And she's not alone. We are not hearing about the dissent in the EU and in the UN. All we're
You're right,
getting is the
because
American propaganda.
right, because our mainstream, it doesn't report anything that doesn't fit their narrative. I mean, they are getting just as bad as Izvestia, okay, and Pravda were, in the old days of the Soviet Union, because nothing gets through their filters, and they
No,
always
no,
they
nothing does.
shut everything down that doesn't agree, okay, with their narrative. For example, from watching the mainstream, do you have the impression that the war with the Ukraine might end in 2 weeks? I bet none of you have that impression. Now, I'm not saying it's going to end, okay, in 2 weeks. What I'm saying is there's a cauldron in the eastern part of the Ukraine, and the jaws of a pincer movement are closing in, threatening the whole of the Ukrainian army. 200,000 soldiers. Okay. Uh, the essentially what the Russians are doing is they're taking their sweet time, being very clever about closing the whole thing off. Once they get it closed, then either those soldiers are going to very quickly surrender, or they're going to be cut to ribbons by artillery. The Russian artillery is really amazing at doing that.
Supposedly even far superior to US.
So it is going to be impossible for those people to resist. And it's coming soon. They've been closing the jaws now for quite some time, but we don't hear that, in the American press. And if that happens real fast and there is a surrender real fast, our mainstream media is going to be caught completely flat footed. They won't know what to say. There's going to
Oh,
be
they'll come up with
confusion
something.
among
Everybody
them.
look up HR 5181. Look it up and read it. It'll explain a lot.
Okay, did you say HR 5181?
Yes.
Okay, what is that bill?
It's a propaganda bill.
Oh, it's a propaganda bill.
It's the bill that made it legal to feed the American people propaganda.
Oh, great. Okay, Steve says, where's AOC on Green New Deal when we need her? And Steve says Lisa is correct. That was at 10:09. You're talking about federal or state politics. Kay says Lisa always has great ideas. Well, I think so too. Robert says, I came in late tonight, but I was text banking for Jessica Cisneros today. Steve says federal, state, and local. Dolores says, hi, Robert. Great to see you here. Robert says, I found out one of the people that is running for state senate in my district is taking corporate and PAC money. Great, Robert. He says, I think that some of the rural Republicans might go for single payer if you explain it to them right.
Oh,
Uh,
they absolutely will. I mean, when I was at the Buffalo protest, um, I was talking about, I was being really practical, and I pulled single payer. Well, I pulled the current situation down into what it means when you work for an entity and for once again, your insurance plan is going to be too expensive and your company says we're not going to be able to afford this. We've got to change insurance plans. And you call the broker and the broker comes and pitches you a new plan and your employees have no say at it because your company has to take what it can afford. And then what happens? You get a new doctor, right? And then what happens? You go into the doctor and you're lucky if you get a half hour, 40 minutes. Most people sometimes only get 20. And in 20 minutes, that doctor is supposed to uh, get your complete medical history and also address whatever it is that you're there for, because most people don't go to the doctor anymore until they're sick, right? And they don't have time to get a comprehensive understanding of what your medical situation is. And when you are on, especially in New York, when you're on the privatized Medicaid plan, you can get thrown off of your Medicaid for no reason, an off-cycle $20 premium that you didn't anticipate coming, and then you don't have coverage until you figure out that you've missed that premium, pay that premium. Then from that point on, you've got to wait until the next billing cycle, and that entire piece of the puzzle, you don't have healthcare coverage, right? And when I was
and then
talking
you're
about
open
that,
to a financial disaster, okay, if
mhm,
you get ill and you need care.
and when I was finished with that, one of the activists who introduced himself to me, who was from one of the Western New York Health Act chapters, said, "I really wish you lived up here because I'd like to have you talk to the people that, you know, are with me." And I said, "Well, where are you?" And he was in a more rural area, right? But I also went into some other things that a lot of people who don't follow policy in healthcare and understand it, they don't understand this. But, the Social Security Act created Medicare. It also created Medicaid. Okay. That's how they came about. And I was talking about how the privatization of those two things, the average Joe might think, oh, privatization of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Well, that just means that, they're going to invest that pot of money. We all know that's not a pot of money. It gets appropriated and it gets funded, right? So there's not this big pool of money sitting somewhere that the private sector can invest and grow. But that's what most people think, right?
Yeah,
And when I explained to them that there is no such thing as some pot of money that they're going to invest and grow for us, all it is that when that money does get appropriated, they insert themselves as a middleman. That opens up a lot of people's eyes when they start understanding that that's what it means, right? This whole idea of, oh, you have to privatize Social Security, you have to privatize Medicare and Medicaid. Well, the average Joe's thinking, well, that might not be so bad. They can invest it and maybe they'll grow it instead of the government sitting on it. That's not what happens. Us here in MMT, we understand this, right? But the average American citizen does not. They don't understand that.
yeah, they don't understand that the government is sitting on nothing.
Right.
It
Right.
creates the money when it needs it.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you know,
Right?
right?
So when you tell them that and they start to realize, you know what? Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid was created so that there was a low cost administrative benefit for your health care. And now you've inserted a middleman and they're profiting off of something where the character of the money was never intended for that. Then I
Yes.
threw on top of it that they had to weaken the antitrust laws to make the Affordable Care Act go. And, people's mouths start like, wow, wow. Okay. Now, those of us who are privy to all of this stuff that know this stuff, right? This is old hat. Never underestimate who you're talking to.
Yes.
Getting down into the simplest things like that money was never meant to be profited off of. You worked your entire life so that there was a record of you working, so that when it was time, there was a record so that you qualified for that benefit. That's all those taxes are.
Yes,
That's
that's all
it.
they are. And what people don't realize as well is that when the Affordable Care Act was passed, it was supposed to be, okay, a requirement in that act that there would be a loss ratio. It's called, a medical. Okay, what it meant was that 85% of the money from the Affordable Care Act was to go to treat patients. That was supposed to be a requirement, a theoretical requirement. So the loss ratio, okay, was 85% on that, which meant the other 15%, is going to be spent on administration, marketing, um, 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 and other stuff. But at least 85% was going to be spent supposedly, okay, on healthcare. That was a big thing at that time because the insurance companies were raking off 30% and only 70% was spent on healthcare. So this was considered to be a big improvement of the act in 2010, okay, when it was passed. Now, since that time, what they've been doing is to privatize parts of it. And the result of the privatization is that some of these insurance companies can once again get down to a loss ratio of 70%, okay, or in the DCE program, okay, or the ACO REACH program, they can now even get down to a loss ratio of 60%. So they're only spending 60% on patients, and the other 30%, okay, or 40%, okay, is now going to the insurance companies for higher salaries, for profits, for buying back stock, uh, for marketing, for all kinds of things that don't involve the treatment, okay, of patients.
Yeah, and the amount of waste that is in the system, and I'm not talking about fraud or abuse, I'm just talking sheer waste. I promise you it's another 10% on top of that. And it's waste because it is needless effort, running around in circles, trying to process something or trying to figure out how to implement something. I have said this before, I think we'll save half of what we're spending on healthcare now if we could get to a single payer system.
Yes, I think so too. And so do the MMTers, by the way. In other words, they think once the system, okay, is in place and is working for a few years,
Once it sustains or stabilizes itself, yeah.
once it stabilizes itself, they think we can get the spending down to 10%, okay, of GDP, which is roughly half, okay, of what we're spending now. That's where all those savings of resources, okay, was coming from, I was talking about before.
We need a new tax designation for doctors, and they need to run the system. No more of this bullshit lobbyist crap. They need to be precluded from a tax designation.
Yeah, they need
Period.
to be thrown out of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Wilmer says, well, last weekend, a bunch of scientists changed themselves to the door of Chase Bank here in Los Angeles, protesting climate change. Yep. Some of the leading climate scientists, okay, were doing that really in response to the IPCC report because the news was getting leaked, okay, at that time. They had heard about it, and that got them really feeling the emergency had come. He says, "Yeah, Lisa, we're going to have to do this ourselves." Let's see.
We look. We all knew this, right? We all knew this. There's no other way around this. I mean, we keep holding out, oh, lesser of two evils, oh, the court, oh, this, oh, that. You know what? They're going to give us what they're going to give us. You know what those two parties do? Oh, tag, you're it. Pass the baton. It's your turn. They're all bought.
Yeah,
Blue and
Road
red
to
doesn't
Villas.
really mean anything. You've got fringe on both sides. We've got fascism clawing at the front door. It is what it is. We are going to have to get into the streets. There's no other way to do this.
Yes, if we don't
There
get into
isn't.
the streets, the fascists are going to take over because they're going
Mhm.
to get into the streets.
Mhm.
Steve Wolfman
And the
says,
fear.
"You think about that, Joe?" He wants to think about getting to be a guest. He says, "Kay says solar panels on the roofs of those cars." Steve says Russia has 3 nuclear footballs as opposed to our one, but they only need 2 out of the 3 to launch. Okay. Robert says, I got a new name for the Affordable Care Act. That is the Unaffordable Care Act, as it's not affordable for most people. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And Steve says, of the Russian 3 nuclear footballs, Putin has one, the defense minister has one, and some official. One is anti Putin, the other pro Putin, so it doesn't mean much. Okay, I'm not sure where you heard that, but it's a nice story anyway. Kay says, yes, both are bought, Lisa. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I understand that people will, scream up and down and jump up and down about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and all of this and all of that, but the truth of the matter is they're taking money from donors. And the far right extreme wing, the actual crazies, we all know who they are. Okay. The rest of them, they have to follow the leader of the party or they get ousted from the party. But the truth of the matter is, I fervently believe that there are more good people in there than there are bad people in there, but they are beholden to the damn parties and they are bought.
Yes.
And that is really the extent of it. And I don't have any faith that if we put a bunch of new people in there that they're not going to get eaten up by the machine either, but it would at least give us some breathing room, some time to get some things done.
Yeah, but if we get rid of people for that reason, and it's highly visible that we got rid of them for that reason, that will be a deterrent to other people in relation to taking the big money again. And if we keep doing this cycle after cycle, after 3 or 4 cycles, we're going to have that big money out of politics, and that's what we need. We really
And
got
we
to
need to do it
drive.
everywhere.
We got to drive the bad money out of politics. Just we have to be merciless about that. You have to realize driving the money out of politics means driving the people out of politics who are taking that money.
I
That's it.
went
It's
to a planning
simple.
commission meeting yesterday, Joe, and it was it was laughable. It should have been a Saturday Night Live skit. It really should have been. The uh the developer, the land development chair or commissioner or whatever he was on the planning commission. Um, you know, I haven't even lived here 7 years, and even I know who's in the pockets of the uh, builders and the developers and the engineering firms that are in the pockets of the developers and all of that. You can't even get like a decent study done on your property if you've got a problem because everybody's affiliated with a builder or a developer, right? I've got a code inspector that is the biggest family who sold land because they owned all the land around here to all the developers. And he's code inspector. They're supposed to, for every tree they take down, they're supposed to plant 3 more. But hell, it only takes a $1,500 waiver and all of that goes away. We've got lawyers saying things like, oh, well, trees don't really soak up water, but all of the foliage around the trees on the ground do. What? I mean, I embarrassed them. I was just like, "Oh, you did this to yourself. Get ready. Buckle up." I couldn't believe it.
Buckle up.
I couldn't believe it. It was just like, "You wanna be that dumb? I'm gonna make everybody aware of how dumb you are." Quick Google search. "Oh, a large tree can absorb as much as 100 gallons of water a day. So if you take down 300 of them, do you think you've altered the water table?" Aren't you the engineer? It's unbelievable, the corruption. It's unbelievable. So what my point is that if you want to make a change and you've got the time, like I am seriously considering landing my little butt on the planning commission. Good luck getting anything through with me on there.
Oh, so you're going to run for the planning commission?
I'm damn close to thinking about it, yeah.
Oh, that's going to be really interesting.
Oh, you should see these clowns. I should have taken a picture. Like I said, Saturday Night Live skit. You wouldn't have believed it. And they placate you like you're their best buddy. Oh, give me a call tomorrow.
Okay, I think we have reached the end. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Okay, I'd like you to stay for a minute or two after we close, Lisa.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for coming. Okay, it was fun. I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah, you guys, we've got to do this. We've got to do this together. I mean, if you want me to come and meet up with you, give me some dates and we can do something. I mean, in Los Angeles, Robert, Sakuru's not far away. And if you wanted to do something, I'm sure that he would plan with you.
I'm sure he would.
I'm
In fact,
absolutely
he
certain of
seems
it.
to be planning with people all over California, wherever there's something going on. He seems to be there.
Yep. All right, you guys. See you later.
Okay, good night.